I think we've been really comfortable about talking about race and just about African Americans in the science profession. What would you guys want to say about how that's affected you this year, and how you feel talking to me about race? If you feel like it's awkward, or how those conversations have gone this year?
I feel very comfortable talking to Mr. Riskis about racism because it's like it's a smooth and a good conversation talking about it, like you understand. And then the tone is all good. And he's like one of the type of teachers I would take a time and talk to about it. He said, as an African Americans, we need to get our education because it's our time to shine. Because back in slavery, we didn't have no time to shine, we have education. So I took that leave and I just followed through with that.
He's open a lot, and he shares his cultural heritage a lot with us. Like, he talks about Lithuania, but he doesn't push it on us, but he's tells us about it. Then then I'll get interested in it, and then we'll keep asking questions. Then he'll ask a question about my heritage. Then it's comfortable talking with him about these things. Because certain of the teachers that normally are white don't really want to talk about that, those things. But him and a few other teachers here are okay talking with me about race. And to me, he doesn't really seem to be bothered by the race. His demeanor, so he don't act differently around black people than he do around white people, and I value him for that. Sometimes people overlook how powerful we can be if we just say that we are black and say that, well, I'm black, and because I'm black, I can do great things, and because of that, and because of my ancestors and how their birthrights were stolen, how I'm a nigger to some people, and how I can still use those negative connotations and still shed light on the black race, makes it more worthwhile.
The biggest jump I took from first year to second year was feeling comfortable about talking about race to my students. For the first time in my life, I was the minority. I was the only white person in my classroom. And I'm not going to lie and say that it was comfortable for me right away. And I'm not going to lie and say that my students accepted me right away. So what have I done to kind of break that gap has been really getting to know them. I mean, it's so important to get to know them outside the classroom. And that doesn't mean you have to spend hours with them every day outside of school or go make a home visit. It could just mean going in the hallway and saying hi and asking how their day has been. Really making them understand that I care about them. You can't have conversations about race and you can't ask them how they feel about it and get an honest response until they know they care about you. Before giving my opinion on it, or my thoughts, I'd like to ask them how they feel they're portrayed, and how they feel the media looks at them, or outside people from the outside look at them. It could be a little controversial, or it could be a little awkward, but once I opened the door, we really had some productive and meaningful conversations. I think we definitely have a role. As a white male, I know my students, look at me as a figure, someone that they respect, someone they look up to, and just because I am white doesn't mean that they can't look up to me. And it's really important to have individuals who are not of the African American race or of any other race. It's really important to have the perspective and to understand that racism is really alive today. It's mostly implicit, but a lot of people have prejudice and racist thoughts. People that I'm very close friends with, some people in my family, and a lot of times it's important to have a conversation with them about that, to make them realize why there are so many problems in our community, in the south side of Chicago or the west side of Chicago. It's important to to have someone that understands that perspective and to have conversations with other people that don't have that perspective. Most importantly, showing them the awesome things that our students do. That's when you can really cure racism. Just really listening to them. Our students don't get listened to enough. Giving them opportunities to be leaders in the classroom and their community. So we really listen to them, give them an opportunity to speak. There's no way we can understand their situation. I think it's important to get out in the community, to get to know their families, allowing them to be leaders, allowing them to kind of take control, not just telling them what to do, but giving them choices and asking them to make goals. That's really the best way to run a classroom. It's the best way to be sensitive academically and culturally is giving students options. Let them lead the movement.
So like when I think of profound additional impact, I think of my own experience in the classroom. I am a first generation American. My parents are Colombian. And I grew up in a very similar background as my students. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment where the four of us shared one room. I didn't actually have a bed. And so in coming in, I thought, you know what, I'm going to be really good at this because I am Latino. My students are Latino. We both come from disadvantaged backgrounds, but I've made it. I'm like a Latino man who's made it. I've gone to like college. I'm here working for Teach for America. Like I've made it, and that's what I like. Went in my idea was going into my school thinking like I'm going to help these kids make it too. And so Colombian Spanish is very different than Mexican Spanish, and a lot of things I would correct my students. I would say, no, you don't say it like that. You say it this way. I would always like ask my students to button up their polos, like really simple little things, but actually in retrospect have really had a big impact on our relationship because I wasn't actually valuing what they were. But I didn't realize this at the time. I realized it when it was Mexican Independence Day, and in our school we do like a Mexican Independence Day parade. And I took out my kids wearing piñatas because I thought, you know, that's really Mexican. I think that's what we'll do, and I did. And it wasn't until a coworker asked me why my kids were wearing piñatas, and I said, well, isn't that like what Mexican Independence Day is about? Like, and she's like, no, that's actually not Mexican Independence Day. And I felt so, at that moment, I felt so ignorant, like I hadn't actually made any connections, because here I was thinking that I was going to make my students make it, and I was just telling them how to live their lives, telling them that their culture wasn't important, when it was so similar to my own culture. And so when I think of profound additional impact, I think, okay, it's actually about recognizing that we might be similar, but there are actually so many differences within that similarity. And recognizing that and valuing that is so important. And what it meant, that was like a shift in my mindset about how I run my classroom and how I develop a relationship with my students, my parents, and my school. I didn't want it to be, here I am to save you. It's actually, let me bring out the best in all of you, my parents, my students, and my school. And that's actually what I think made a really big difference for my 2 years, is really understanding that shift. And that has just been really helpful in building those relationships and making them stronger, because it's not about helping people become me, but helping people become the best of themselves that they can become. I did two things. I think one was like really apologize. I apologized to my students. I apologized to my parents. I said that and my students are like first graders, but I think it was still important for them to hear that I'm really sorry, and to really, I tried to understand more about Mexican culture and like what that looks like, because I'm from the East Coast, in New York, it's not really very Mexican.
Yeah.
So really understanding what that means and how the community functions. Like I started going outside every morning of our school, like talking to the woman that sells tamales, talking to my parents, inviting them to my classroom. And that was a better way to understand who they were. Like I asked my parents where they worked. My students would bring me things, and and I could see that we were like making a stronger connection.
Yeah.
And I think that was important because I hadn't done that before. This year, I think that relationship has grown exponentially. I think it's empowered me, and I think it's allowed me to have like deeper and more kind of grittier conversations with my parents and concerning about what it means for their child to be special education, what it means to be in this community and like the potential that students have.
And I just think that sometimes in the diversity sessions, we talk mostly just about white teachers and black students, and then how there's like a huge difference between the differences that we see between white teachers and black teachers. But there's obviously core members of all colors, and for someone like me, I feel kind of in the middle. I feel like I'm not quite in either bubble, and I think regardless of where you fall on the spectrum, it's still important that any teacher is going to have those differences. They need to bridge the gap that they need to close. I think being an ally means that as I am teaching my students, I don't think about myself as this savior, that I'm going to come and bring all the qualities that I have and I'm going to share it here. I'm going to give it to you. I think that being an ally, and something that a lot of teachers need to keep in mind, is that it's a teamwork, it's a team effort, and it takes a lot of work on both ends. It takes a lot of work on the teacher, it takes a lot of work on the students, and I think being an ally is being really open to suggestions and being really humble about understanding that, like, even if you're the best teacher there ever has been, there's still things you could do to improve, and then there are still differences between you and your students. It may not be racial, it may not be cultural, but there are still differences, and you need to close those gaps, and you need to fill in where you're lacking. Being one of the first Asian person that my students have encountered, I try really hard to teach them about different types of cultures besides just white and black. I teach my students about cultures that I am a part of, Asians and California-related cultures, but also I teach them about cultures that neither of us share, just so we keep on having an open mind.
I know specifically being a black male is even more important just because the black male identity, I feel like, it is on the ropes right now. And so in terms of what they accomplish and how they accomplish it, one, I think it just is a point of inspirational for a lot of them. A lot of my kids say, like, Mr. Banks, I'm motivated just because, like, there's not a lot of you. I just think that they're just even a little bit more motivated, a little more inspired by what I've accomplished in the past and what they can accomplish in the future. So I think that profound additional impact means that, like, because I share those lines of like similarities, I understand the things that they may have dealt with or that they deal with. Even though each student is unique and has their own life stresses, I think when they walk in the classroom, they see me, they look for the lines of similarities before they look for the lines of differences. Where I feel like if a teacher of a different race, they first point out what is different between them and the teacher, and so I don't have to break those barriers that much. So at first, when I walked into the classroom, I didn't know that that me being in the classroom was going to be such a profound thing for my students. Because I didn't go to a high school where there were a lot of black people, and so when I came to the classroom, I felt an extra responsibility to represent, I guess, the professional world for African Americans, and that made my job a little scary at first. But as I became more aware of what my identity was and how I wanted my kids to view me, as a point of positivity for our community, as a point of as a trajectory as to like what the face of our community could end up being, I just think that it allowed me to continue to grow into my own identity and also to foster their identity. Through the work of my own identity and understanding like where I come from and understanding those lines of differences, but those many lines of similarities with my students, I was able to like call upon those things and bring those to the front of their mind and use that as a way to continue to use that to show them how education is important and how their identity is married to that concept. Personally, I think it's really important for me to be aware of my culture and how it fits into the classroom, and even how it sometimes doesn't fit into the classroom. Because without understanding that piece, we can't really start to grow our students. And so for the whole core, I think that it's really important for them to understand that like ultimately the achievement gap will not be closed until our kids are crying out for their own improvement of their own education. And so I think that the only way to achieve that is for the whole core to see that teaching about culture and teaching about the achievement gap in our classrooms is the best way for kids to get on board with improving the education. And for the whole movement, I mean, the movement will move by itself once that happens.
Like in today's society, it's a great number of people who like put African Americans in this box where, you know, they don't want to go to school and learn, get an education, and like they're not prepared for college. And I honestly feel that like it just means that you have to work harder. And even if you do work hard, like you have to give the extra 110% just because you're an African American. He was like basically saying like we should be proud who we are, you know, who we're growing up to be and what we're becoming.
He inspires me to go shoot for my goals. You know, like when I get in college, I can overcome an obstacle, you know, thinking about him and his development and knowledge. And he has impacted on me because of him being, you know, an African-American male. You know, because people always have this perception on us that we are just naturally ignorant. I think it's better that he's an African-American male because, you know, we like, you know, are the same a little bit, the same race, and it just makes me feel better. Like if he can do it, I can do it too, definitely.